in White Sands, New Mexico, the sand shifts in a way that's so strange you don't like thinking about how it's happening. One night it seems to swallow something whole. The next it spits it back out, but twisted. Tourists don't notice it. Scientists pretend it's explainable. But the night crews out there, the ones working the missile range outpost alone in the dark, they know. And that's who Lou was. And when he finally talked, really talked about all of it, what he told me was insane. Really insane. So get ready for the absolute journey of a lifetime, and be sure to pack protection. Name's Lou. I'm a UTV mechanic. Contract gig out at a maintenance shed on the edge of White Sands missile range. Government property, but contractors like me get shuffled in to handle non-critical jobs. My job? Keep the utility vehicles running. ATVs, sandcats, side-by-sides, anything with tires or treads. They break down fast out here, and when they do, someone has to go get them. I ran night shifts, less traffic, less oversight, cooler. I didn't mind. I could bring a cooler, kill time between runs, catch up on engine work with nothing but coyotes and sand for company. Except the sand started shifting. First week was smooth. Replaced a radiator, fixed 2 busted control arms, rotated a fleet. Routine stuff. I drove out to marker 114 around 2 a.m. to retrieve a stalled Polaris. Pretty standard recovery, but the vehicle wasn't there. Not a trace. Just tire tracks leading about 10 feet into a flat stretch of dunes, and then gone. Like it sank. I thought maybe someone moved it, called it in, got nothing. Next morning it was back, sitting in the exact spot I'd first looked. Battery dead. Keys still in the ignition. I chalked it up to desert weirdness until it started happening more. Twice more that week vehicles went missing. Same deal. Out on the flats, vanished, showed back up like ghosts. Then I noticed the footprints. They weren't made by boots. Too long, narrow, toes that ended in sharp points, and deep. Too deep for something barefoot. I followed them once. They led around my work shed in a perfect arc, like something had circled it, watching. I didn't sleep much after that. Then came the night I found the impressions. I was sweeping the lot with floodlights. Nothing fancy, just a routine perimeter check before shutdown. But something caught my eye. Just beyond the fence line in the soft white sand were 2 deep hollows, roughly human-shaped, not laying flat. More like something had been pressed up from beneath the sand, like someone had been lying under there, waiting. I told my supervisor. He laughed, said, "You know what this place does to guys who don't drink enough water." I stopped reporting things after that, but I started marking them. Every time I saw those impressions, I logged the location. GPS tagged, time stamped, always between midnight and 3, always in the quietest part of the range. Always where the sand seemed too perfect. I started sleeping in the rig. It escalated during a storm. We don't get many, but when we do, the lightning lights up the whole basin. I was running diagnostics in the main shed when the power flickered. The backup kicked in. I switched to handheld light, checked the breakers, then heard the sound. A thump, then another. From the roof. Not hail, not wind. Footsteps. I killed the interior light and stepped out, shined my beam across the ridgeline. Nothing. But when I looked down, there were prints, leading down the wall, from the roof line into the sand. Long, deep, same as before. That night, I didn't go back inside. I stayed in the UTV with the engine idling and high beams pointed at the dunes. Around 2:12 a.m., something moved. Just a ripple at first, like the sand was breathing. Then a shape pushed up. A head. Something hairy, covered in pale gray fur that matched the sand too well. The top of it lifted first, then shoulders, then arms. Long arms, bent the wrong way. It didn't crawl out, it unfolded. It stood upright, 8, maybe 9 feet tall. Broad at the top, tapering down. Its face, or what I guessed was its face, was flat. No nose, just a mouth. No lips. just rows of blackened teeth and eyes. Small, black, reflective, like obsidian, but not blind. It saw me, didn't move, just stared. I kept the UTV running, didn't dare turn off the lights. It blinked once, then ducked back down into the sand like a swimmer into water. No noise, no trace. That should have been it, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Started watching archived drone footage from maintenance sweeps. They blur out a lot, but I noticed something strange. Interference. Same timestamp. Always the same hour. Always the same locations. Once in a single frame, I saw a flash of movement, like a blur of fur just under the surface. I asked around, quietly. One of the radar guys said the old-timers used to call them the subs. Said they weren't animals. Said they predated the base. I asked what happened to people who got too curious. He said, nobody gets that curious twice. Final straw came 2 weeks later. They sent me to pick up a broken-down hauler at marker 133. Same deal. Reported dead, GPS static. I arrived at 2 a.m. Vehicle was gone. But the dunes around it had shifted. Footprints everywhere. I stepped out to mark the coordinates. That was my job. 30 seconds max. In the dead silence, I heard it. Breathing. Not behind me. Under me. I jumped back into the UTV, threw it in gear, spun tires across the sand. Made it maybe 50 yards before something slammed the rear axle. The whole rig bucked like it hit a rock. I looked back. Nothing there, except an imprint. Something had reached up and tried to grab it. Then came the lights. 3 vehicles. Silent. Black. No markings. Wide wheelbases and treads like tanks. They moved across the dunes like they knew every inch of it. Out of one, men in gray suits stepped out. Not military, not regular contractors. They carried long poles and devices that made low-frequency hums. Within seconds, they had the creature netted. It fought, screamed, a sound like metal tearing in wind all at once. They hit it with something. No gunfire, just a pulse, and it went still. They loaded it into the last vehicle. No hesitation, no explanation. One man turned toward me. He didn't speak, just raised a hand like a warning, or maybe a thank you. Then they drove off. No tire marks left behind. I didn't sleep for 3 days. When I finally did, I had a dream of the sand opening, of dozens of them, not attacking, just standing there, watching. Next morning, I handed in my clearance badge. Said the heat got to me. They didn't ask questions, just signed the exit forms and walked me out. That was 4 months ago. But sometimes when I drive past open sand, I swear I see those same impressions. Not laying flat, pushed up from underneath, and I keep waiting for the sand to breathe again. I've been meaning to write this down right away, because the details keep slipping out of my head when I try to tell somebody out loud, and I'm worried I might never get it all straight if I wait too long. This all started a few nights ago, specifically on the evening of September 10th, when I was finishing up chores here at my place near White Sulphur Springs, Montana. Normally, I board and train horses for folks who don't have their own land, or who are just passing through on the way to bigger events in Billings or Bozeman. I'm used to strange things happening, unexpected storms, mountain lions in the distance, the occasional bear rummaging too close, but never anything like this. That night after I'd brought the horses in and was double-checking the stable doors, I heard this sound that made me feel like my bones were rattling from the inside. It wasn't quite a wolf's howl. Trust me, I'm used to that. But it wasn't a coyote either. It was deeper, even more guttural. It rolled across the pastures, echoing in a way I can't recall ever hearing around here. I remember pausing in the stable aisle, gripping the side of a stall, thinking maybe one of the horses had gotten injured and was screaming. But I quickly realized none of them were making that noise. Daisy, the mare I'd been working with, was just stamping her foot nervously, and the rest were shuffling around like they do when they're spooked but not panicked. I went to lock up the feed room and then walked along the fence line, shining my flashlight out into the tall grass. It was already getting cold, and a little fog was settling in just above the ground. Pretty typical for this area in early fall. I toggled through the fence perimeter until I reached the far corner, the part that borders that old abandoned orchard. Some folks around here say that orchard was left to rot back in the 1950s, but I've never gotten the full story. Anyway, I was walking my usual route, checking for signs of a downed wire. The last thing I needed was a horse wandering off in the night. And that's when I noticed this smell, like copper and something rotting. I remember thinking one of the neighbors must have shot a deer that ran off onto our property. It's happened before, although usually they come and let me know. But as I got closer, I noticed bright patches in the grass under my flashlight. It took me a moment to realize it was blood, quite a lot of it, splashed in a wide area. The beam caught something to my left, and I realized I was looking at parts of a deer scattered around. Not just torn open, but scattered. I've come across kills before, cougars, coyotes, even an occasional bear kill, but I swear I have never seen a deer so thoroughly shredded. The head was missing entirely, and I couldn't see tracks other than these odd, elongated impressions in the dirt. As I leaned in to get a better look, that same unearthly howl echoed again. It felt closer, and I stood up so fast I nearly dropped my flashlight. The horses further down the pasture started whinnying, and it made me realize I was totally alone out there with something that had the power to do that to a full-grown deer. I kept telling myself it had to be a cookie bear, or maybe a rabid wolf, but I've never known them to tear something apart quite like that. I ran back, made sure the barn was secured, and I locked all the stable doors in a hurry. At that point, I didn't hear anything else, so I went inside my house, which fortunately sits about 20 yards from the barn. I stayed up most of the night, peeking through my living room window that overlooks the main pasture. Every time the wind whistled or there was a rustle in the trees, I kept expecting to see some huge creature bounding across my property. The next morning, I went out early to see if any tracks were visible in better light. It rained lightly around 4 a.m., so I figured the ground wouldn't be great for prints. Sure enough, the blood-soaked grass was still visible, but most of the surrounding area was muddy and clumpy, like it had been churned up. There were definitely large canine prints, much bigger than anything I've seen from a regular dog, or even a wolf. The stride between them seemed off too, like whatever made them could walk on 2 legs sometimes, and then drop down to all 4s. At this point, I started racking my brain, thinking about the stories I've overheard over the years. Folks around here sometimes talk about big dog-like creatures that roam the high ridges of the Big Belt Mountains, though it's often chalked up to tall tales told at the local bars. One neighbor once mentioned that a friend of his encountered something with the head of a wolf, but the posture of a man. Another older fellow who since passed on used to say there were wolf monsters prowling around near the national forest boundary, but no one ever produced any sort of visual proof. So I tried to rationalize. I told myself it could be a bear with mange, or an oversized stray dog that got feral and violent. But then I could still hear that haunting howl playing over and over in my mind, and it didn't fit any normal explanation. I continued doing my daily routines, but I've been more vigilant. On Wednesday, right around dusk, I was bringing the horses back in when I caught a glimpse of something by the tree line. Silhouetted, tall, somehow hunched over but still giving the impression it could stand upright if it wanted to. I tried to shine the flashlight, but by the time I fumbled the switch, it had moved deeper into the trees. The horses were more jittery than normal, especially Maggie, my younger mare who's usually pretty mellow. It was like they all sensed something completely unnatural about whatever was out there. Side tangents keep popping in my mind. I remember an old rancher telling me that weird sightings seem to ramp up in the fall, especially in areas like ours that butt up against large expanses of wilderness. He used to grumble that these creatures, he never said dogman, but he alluded to something wolfy and smart, come closest to farmland when they know the game is migrating. I can't help but connect that with the deer carcass. Maybe it was migrating deer that lured it in, or maybe it's been here all along, and I never noticed. The strangest part is, for the last couple of nights, the howlings haven't stopped. They come in waves, usually around 10 p.m., and again around 3 a.m. My dogs, who are usually pretty brave, refused to leave the porch after dark. One night, I stepped outside to check the barn. I have a habit of triple checking the locks now, and I could have sworn I heard heavy breathing from behind one of my livestock trailers. It was that deep, lungy sound, like something big was panting. By the time I swung my flashlight around, there was nothing there, just the feeling that something had been watching me. I'm doing my best to keep this as straightforward as possible, but I keep circling back to the gory nature of that deer. I've lived in Montana my whole life, and have seen countless predators take down wildlife. This was beyond normal predatory ferocity, like it was meant as a statement or even a warning. For which reason, I can't say. A couple of local guys were telling me that if they heard me talk about wolfmen or dogmen, they'd think I was losing my marbles, so I haven't mentioned the specifics. They just asked if I saw a bear or a large wolf, and I nodded along. Sometimes I think that's safer than telling them my full truth. I'm hesitant to go to the authorities about it. The local game warden might write it off as just another predator, and I don't have any photographic evidence. Plus, the deer carcass was mostly hauled off by scavengers the next day, which is typical. I kicked myself for not taking pictures right then, but I was so freaked out at the time, I didn't even think about it. I'm not sure they'd believe me anyway. Around here, folks keep quiet about these things, unless they want to become the talk of the feed store checkout line. It's entirely possible that I'm letting my imagination run wild, but something tells me I'm not. For now, I'm focusing on keeping my animals safe. I'm planning to reinforce the fencing and install a couple of extra floodlights by the orchard boundary. I might even set up a game camera, though I don't know if that's inviting trouble. Part of me wants proof, but another part of me is worried about what exactly I'll see in that footage if it ever catches something. My gut feeling is that whatever did this to the deer is still prowling around. Those howls and that feeling of being watched aren't going away. Last night, the horses were so on edge I could barely settle them. I put on a coat and sat out there in the barn for a while, listening in the darkness. There was this moment, maybe around 1:30 in the morning, when I heard the faint brush of movement along the back wall, almost like hands scraping. It was stealthy though, and when I stepped outside, I didn't see a thing. Just that unwavering sense that I wasn't alone. I know how this all sounds, but out here in rural Montana, we have enough bizarre stories floating around that you start to wonder if maybe we're not all just exaggerating. Something is out there, something that's at least partially canine, but also defies simple explanation. I never thought I'd be the one writing in about a possible dogman sighting, but here I am, with no rational explanation for the horrifying scene I stumbled on, or the intangible presence lurking around my land. I've been traveling as a guest lecturer for a small liberal arts college in Arkansas, focusing on folk medicine practices in southern Louisiana for the better part of this past spring and summer. It was supposed to be a routine fieldwork trip, mostly me interviewing local healers, midwives, and whoever would talk to me about generational remedies, things passed down through families. I was specifically in the area around Vermilion Parish, popping in and out of Abbeville, Erath, and Del Cambre, asking folks about their home cures for everything from the flu to minor infections or even old curses. What I didn't expect, and I still can't shake it, was stumbling upon something I can only describe as reptilian lore. It started early June when I met a woman in Erath. I'll just call her Miss E, because I promised I wouldn't share her real name. I was late for our scheduled talk because the only bus that runs through there was sidelined with a flat tire on LA 14. While I was waiting, a local sheriff's deputy asked me about my business in the area, and he was curious why anyone from out of state would be so keen on old home remedies. After a bit of back and forth, he dropped a hint that there were certain traditions around here that other folks wouldn't talk about so easily. He didn't elaborate, but it planted the first seed of curiosity. When I finally made it to Miss E's home, she was surprisingly forthcoming. She'd been taught healing methods from her grandmother, who in turn learned from a revered traiteur many decades ago. For the first hour or so, we just went through how to treat sprains with poultices made of crushed leaves and cat's claw vine, plus a weird tip for soothing fevers with leftover coffee grounds. Then, almost out of nowhere, She told me her grandmother also warned that not every sickness had a natural cause. In that conversation, she mentioned the scalebacks. She wouldn't say it outright at first, but I gradually pieced together the idea that certain local folk believed in reptilian beings living among us, particularly near the swampy outskirts. She said her grandmother referred to them as les écailleurs, the scaly ones, something akin to a hidden presence that occasionally messed with the water or the land. The creepiest part was how calmly she mentioned it, as if it was just another tidbit of local lore. All indirect references, she never said, "They look like giant lizards posing as humans," or anything that dramatic. It was more like, "Be cautious in the marsh at night because you never know who's watching." At that point, I truly thought it was just legend, something akin to a cautionary tale. But the next day, I ventured out around the coastal marshes near White Lake to meet another lineage healer, a man in his late 60s who had apparently studied some of the older French Creole traditions. The man refused to give me even a first name, but he said he was distantly related to a well-known traiteur from the 1960s. He spent more time talking about invasive plant species than actual healing. But when I brought up the grandmother's stories to him, he turned pale. He told me that back in 1974, there was a rumor some government types were snooping around the wetlands at night, investigating sightings of something that walked with a stooped posture and had smooth greenish skin. He never saw it himself, but he claimed he'd been told people in black SUVs took an elderly local into custody for questioning when she wouldn't stop talking about reptilian visitors. I tried to get more detail, but he pulled back almost immediately and muttered something about, "That's all you need to know." I couldn't let this go, odd as it was. I dug into local newspaper archives in Abbeville and Kaplan, combing through microfiche to see if there was any mention of these events. While I didn't find anything explicitly referencing reptilians, I did come across a short piece from July 1974 in the Kaplan Herald about rural communities complaining of military men with unmarked vehicles around the marsh. The article was less than 50 words, more of a filler note than anything, but it was enough to light a fire in me. Why would the government, assuming it really was them, care about some local legend? Later that week, I took a detour to Lake Arthur, my logic being that it's another area historically known for old remedies and French-speaking communities. I ended up chatting with an older fisherman who said his grandfather always claimed to have spotted human-shaped gators near the banks at night. I asked what exactly that meant, and all he'd say was, "They come up from the water, but they walk like real men. They know your thoughts, friend." Nothing direct, just that. I tried to press him for more details, like how they looked or acted, but he shut down on me. Suddenly, he was talking about the catfish population, as if he realized he'd flung open a door he never intended me to walk through. What truly unnerved me was encountering a local midwife in Rain, the frog capital. Trust me, I got sidetracked by that entire backstory of all the frog festivals, who indicated a belief that these reptilian beings weren't just lurking near the swamps, but some might actually live disguised among the broader community. She told me the older generation used to talk about certain families exhibiting unusual cold-blooded traits, not literally but in the sense that they always kept to themselves, rarely displayed normal emotional responses, and seemed to almost slip out of community gatherings without a trace. Indirectly, she mentioned her mother used to say, "They wear their Sunday best over a snake's body." I asked if she was referencing the same scalebacks I'd heard about elsewhere, and she nodded without clarifying further. What leaves me rattled, more than anything, is how these tidbits all line up from people who supposedly have never met each other. The secrecy, the references to unmarked cars back in the 70s, the subtle hints about families who don't seem entirely human. It all creeps under your skin in a way I didn't expect when I set out to document herbal remedies. Every time I try to gather more solid details, dates, times, actual sightings, it's like hitting a wall where people either clam up or start talking about mundane topics like fishing regulations or who has the best boudin in town. No one wants to confirm anything beyond hints and secondhand stories. I'm still in Louisiana, planning to head east toward Morgan City, since that's another hot spot for local folklore, but I'm honestly questioning how deep this lore might go. I'm just as interested in the hush-hush attitude and possible government connection as I am in the reptilian stories themselves. It's so peculiar that people in different parishes, hours apart, echo the same hushed warnings. There's a sense that if you talk too much about it, something or someone might come around asking questions, like those black SUVs from the 70s. I was so busy reviewing the photos that I remember hearing coyotes off in the distance, which usually puts me a bit on edge. The desert can get eerie at night, but that was the least of my concerns. I hopped in my car at one point to try to drive up to a slightly higher elevation, just south of the main highway. But by the time I parked and got out again, the lights had changed position significantly, almost like they were miles away but in a split second. I know the military does high-speed trials out here, but that kind of immediate jump just doesn't match up with ordinary flight tests we see from drones or advanced aircraft. It's almost as if they jumped from one point to another with no travel in between. I can't help but recall an encounter I heard a couple years ago from another local astrophotographer who claimed they saw something shaped like a giant V sweeping across the sky near the far edges of the test range. At the time, I dismissed it as an exaggeration, or maybe a formation of stealth craft. Now I'm thinking there's a lot more to it. Sometimes I wonder if these sightings are related to those rumored government projects, like reverse-engineered tech from crashed saucers, one of those stories you hear repeated in UFO circles. There have been plenty of rumored advanced propulsion tests around here after all. The strangest part of the entire night happened around midnight, right when I was seriously contemplating just packing it in and heading home. The largest of the three lights flared up to maybe double its brightness for a split second, and I got this weird, almost static-like crackling in my ear. Not sure if it was just the relief of the nighttime desert silence abruptly messing with me, but it felt strangely electrical. Then the lights were gone, like someone flipped a switch. The sky went back to its normal dark self, full of stars. I spent another hour just standing there, scanning the horizon, hoping they'd come back. Nothing. I felt this weird mix of excitement and dread, if that makes sense. I remember telling myself maybe I should check out the images at home on a larger screen to confirm that I wasn't imagining things. When I finally got back and uploaded them onto my editing software, that streak in the earlier shots was so pronounced. The pixel data for the object was bright white, no color fringe like you'd see from an out-of-focus star or a plane. And then the frames where it seemed to split into three or merge into one are definitely not typical aircraft light patterns. I haven't shared the images widely yet, except to a friend who's got a small YouTube channel on weird sightings in Nevada. I'm always a bit nervous putting them out there. People love to debunk and come up with a trillion reasons why it's a lens flare or a drone squad or something else. But I know what lens flare looks like. This was definitely not that. Something about their movements was just too deliberate and too out of sync with anything else I've witnessed in over a decade of doing nighttime sky photography. If you ask me, it's definitely in the realm of unidentified, you know? Anyway, that night's been on my mind constantly ever since. I keep thinking about all the stories of folks seeing triangular-shaped craft around the test site. I used to think that was just rumor mill stuff, but after seeing what seems to be a triangular pattern myself, I'm not so sure it's just rumor. I'm not saying it's aliens for sure. Maybe it's advanced tech that's totally ours. But if that's the case, the leaps in physics are mind-boggling. The absolute silence and that sudden flicker out. There has to be more to this. I'm going to keep going back out there, try some different vantage points, maybe invest in a better telephoto lens so I can catch more detail next time. If I see anything else, I'll let you know. The desert's a strange place at night. You think you're just out for a quiet evening under the stars, and suddenly you're shaking your head, wondering if you just saw the impossible. That's kind of where I'm sitting right now, having trouble sleeping thinking about what I captured. Even though visually the shots aren't super flashy, they're definitely weird. Sometimes I stare at them and just try to picture what it is I'm looking at.